dancing until my feet fall off. I keep on dancing until the beat goes off. I don't want to go home. I don't want to grow old. I keep on dancing until my feet fall off. I keep on dancing until the beat goes off. I don't want to go home. I don't want to grow old. I keep on dancing until my feet fall off. I keep on dancing until the beat goes off.
Cover them up so you don't see beyond the mask. My world's a dying star. Falling for you is bury me in smoke and ash. In smoke and ash. Me in smoke and ash. In smoke and ash.
Sheriff, if you think I have any qualms about killing this kid, you couldn't be more wrong.
Fantastic. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good morning. It is a happy Friday. Can I get a little bit more energy as a result? It's a happy Friday. It's a fantastic week, of course. So I'm going to try it again as well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And apologies, of course, for the slightly delayed start to our session this morning. But I do welcome you to the post-budget breakfast that is being hosted, of course, by the Momentum Group in partnership with National Treasury today. For those I haven't met, my name is Fifi Peters, and certainly delighted to be spending this morning with you, crunching the numbers, but more importantly, sketching the all-important picture of what this number and this budget does look like for where we're going as a country going forward. DG Duncan Peterson, sir, you're welcome. Thank you so much for the time. Diary's quite tight today, so really appreciate you showing up. Representatives, of course, from the National Treasury who are here with him, the executive from the Momentum Group, industry stakeholders, my colleagues in the media, as well as the individuals who are joining us online, all protocol hopefully observed. I did check the RAND this morning, and I see that it is still looking pretty, essentially holding on to those gains that were accelerated by the delivery of the budget this week that passed the credibility scores of most people. And of course, the budget just adding to a growing list of good news that we have received as a country so far: the ratings upgrade, the removal from the FATF grey list, the record stock market prices, and not to forget the successful hosting of the first ever Africa G20. I think, I don't know, perhaps now the Springboks can take a break from being the only bearers of good news in this country. I don't know how we feel about that. Yes, no. Winners must keep winning. But notwithstanding, there is a lot of positives happening right now. It is good for us to celebrate, just especially given all the negatives that we're coming from. But with that said, we do know that we're not out of the woods as yet. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we can't afford to be seen sleeping at the wheel. This economy is not moving forward as fast as it needs to be. Unemployment is still too worryingly high, and debt, while falling, is still not ideal by most people's accounts. So the purpose of today is to really have a frank discussion on what the hard work does look like that needs to be done to get this economy to where it can be and where it should be. Essentially what we can all do, and those in the room, those out the room, should be doing to make South Africa great again. I know that's a copywritten statement, but I think I did cross my T's there. So please, there is an opportunity for us to engage. There'll be, notwithstanding the tight timeline, there will be an opportunity to ask the Treasury, most notably the DG, a few questions, and we'll also be able to opine amongst each other. But with those few words, I would like to introduce a gentleman who needs no introduction in these circles, but protocol requires me to do so. The CEO of Momentum Securities, Mr. Stephen Sorch. A warm welcome to him, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, colleagues, partners, and of course, representatives of the media. This morning, it's my great privilege to welcome you all to Momentum's annual Beyond the Budget breakfast. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning, which is not only a key moment in our financial calendar, but also an important opportunity for reflection, engagement, and debate. I think we can all agree the national budget is more than merely a set of numbers. It's a statement of priorities. It's a reflection on our country's challenges, our necessary trade-offs, and perhaps most importantly, our collective aspirations. It speaks to how we choose to allocate our scarce resources in the pursuit of growth, stability, and economic and social inclusion. This morning is about more than analysis. It's about partnership. It's about cultivating investor confidence through meaningful collaboration. South Africa's progress depends fundamentally on strong, ethical, and purposeful collaboration between the public and private sectors. Government alone cannot carry the full weight of economic transformation, job creation, infrastructure development, and social upliftment. Equally, the private sector cannot thrive in isolation from the broader social and economic realities of our country. In a country with our history and our great potential, collaboration must be intentional. It requires trust, it requires accountability, and where necessary, sometimes it requires difficult and honest conversations. where leadership is measured not by profits or position, but rather by real-world impact. The decisions discussed this year in the budget will shape the environment within which we operate, but also how we respond to those decisions. How we choose to innovate, collaborate, and lead will determine our collective success. This breakfast brings together leaders, thinkers, decision makers who influence the direction of the economy. Therefore, let us use this platform not only to interpret the budget, but also to reaffirm our commitment to building a capable state, a competitive economy, and a society that works for all. Thank you for being part of this important conversation today. I look forward to a morning of insightful discussions, constructive engagement, and renewed commitment for the work that lies ahead. Moving swiftly along, please allow me to welcome the Director General, Dr. Duncan Pieterse, and Momentum's Chief Economist, my friend Sinisha Pakarasamy, to take us through the first discussion. Thank you.
My head tells me to run, but I can't. But my heart goes ba 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 ba.
Sorry, just a quick housekeeping note before you take it away, sir. I left the most important announcement out. What happens should there be an emergency? You run. And you run through this way. You will see there is in an orderly fashion, there is a staircase and all that you just follow. It takes you out through the car park. In the event that the heat and the fire is coming through the site, you run through that way. Please don't take the elevator, as you do know. Please make your way down the stairs, all the way down to the courtyard. There is also an exit on your right. By then, I think that the team will be on the ground to meet you. In the event that you happen to run and you happen to see a telephone along the way, the number to dial is 2. For reception or security. The team is available 24 hours for medical assistance. Thank you. Sinisha, over to you.
Thank you, Fifi. Thank you to everyone for joining us for our post-budget breakfast. I know that there are many breakfasts out there usually in this week, so thank you for taking the time to spend it with us. I think we are extremely privileged to have the Director General, Duncan Pieterse, with us today. I know that we are quite strapped for time as the DG does have another engagement. So if you don't mind, if I don't read his entire CV, but I can say, as an economist in this market, I'm extremely envious of what is on that CV. And I do know that the DG is probably one of the most humble people in Treasury, and I know he won't mind if I read all of it out. But be assured that we've got one of the best Treasury officials with us today that's going to help us to unpack some of the economic consequences of the 2026 national budget that was tabled on the 25th of February by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. So thank you so much, DG, for taking the time to spend with us today. I know your schedule is very busy. I think to kick off, I would say, I think Treasury really needs to be commended on a budget that, for the first time in a long time, was very politically palatable, and at the same time also managed to ensure that we've got fiscal prudence in play. And so, we often get the political parties after the budget is announced coming up and trying to criticize. And I think this time we even saw some of the opposition parties to the government of national unity really scrambling to find anything to really criticize the budget on. I think even stakeholders like Labour this time were quite complimentary of all of the fiscal issues that were announced. So I think my first question to you is, I know this is quite a significant departure from especially last year when there was a lot of political upheaval. But in this kind of environment, what mechanisms does Treasury have in place to ensure that those coalition dynamics don't dilute the fiscal gains that we have accrued up until this point?
Thank you, Sinisha, and good morning, everyone. So I think I would answer that in two ways. The one is we've made certain changes to the budget process itself at a technical level, and to some extent the minister at his level as well on the political side, to ensure that some of the lessons from last year is embedded in the way that we do our work going forward. So one example of that is every year the budget process starts actually in the previous year through the issuance of budget guidelines. And typically that would be a treasury event where we tell departments, this is how we think you should be thinking about your budgets going forward. And last year we started the preparation for this year's budget by tabling those guidelines at Cabinet and getting Cabinet's endorsement. And that early consultation with Cabinet, I think, helps to set the political scene and secure buy-in a lot earlier than we normally would, and it helps us to get to the point in February where we are able to get many of the things across the line that we are proposing from our side. I think in terms of entrenching some of this going forward, obviously there are changes that we make in the Treasury, but one of the most significant policy changes we are announcing is the idea of a fiscal anchor. And the idea of a fiscal anchor is it's meant to be a legislated provision that entrenches the idea of debt sustainability into law by requiring that every new administration must table a plan to stabilize public finances. And one of our concerns is that we are seeing fiscal metrics improving, we are seeing our yields coming down, but we obviously want to ensure that this is entrenched over a much longer period, and that's the role of the fiscal anchor.
I think, as economists, we all breathed that sigh of relief when the budget date was set and, the budget document came out, given the political upheaval we saw in 2025. In the context of some of the structural versus the cyclical challenges that face South Africa's fiscal outlook, would you say that the country's biggest challenge is the fact that we've got very pedestrian growth? Or is it more a function of a poor allocation of the resources we are already distributing? Or would you say that we just don't have strong enough collection mechanisms for revenue? Or do you think it's just a bit of all three?
Yeah, I think it's mostly the first. I think on the last point, I think SARS has made significant gains over the last few years in terms of strengthening revenue administration, efficiency, and collection. I think there's more that they can do by their own acknowledgement, in particular around the illicit economy, and so a lot of their focus is turning towards the illicit economy at the moment. In terms of the second point, the allocation, I would say, of resources is less of a problem than the efficiency with which those resources are spent and the quality of the spending. And we can get into that in a bit more detail. But I think both of those issues pale in comparison to the first, which is that our growth is structurally low. And when your growth is lower than population growth, your economic growth is lower than population growth, which it has been for many years now, that creates a lot of pressure because it means that spending growth cannot keep up with the needs of the population, and very, very tough choices need to be made. And that's why a lot of our focus has been on how do we accelerate growth, and obviously Operation Vulindlela is a big part of that.
I'm going to pick up on something you mentioned, DG, around the illicit economy. So the South African Revenue Service Commissioner made mention of the illicit economy now contributing between 12 and 15% of GDP, which is staggering, given that it's come from 5%. And we've all heard about maybe the unemployment rate is not as high as it is because we do have a parallel market that's operating in the economy. Maybe you can just share your thoughts around that and any mechanisms in place at Treasury level, whether it's a financing of the justice system, in order to try and get that 15% back down to something a bit more reasonable, like the 5% it used to be. I mean, we'd love it to be eradicated, but I think that's also, wishful thinking.
Yeah, look, I think there are two important points here. The one is coming through the Financial Action Task Force or FATF grey listing process, which highlighted a lot of our the deficiencies in our system when it comes to things like our efforts against money laundering and other illicit activities. That did give us an opportunity to strengthen many of our systems. It gave us an opportunity to strengthen interagency cooperation, which was very weak before. And I think we are building on those successes. And obviously, we have our next FATF mutual evaluation that started this year. And we're working quite hard to ensure that we don't get grey listed again. In terms of allocations, you'll see that in the budget, and if you supplement that with some of the additional funding that's been allocated from the CARA fund, which is a fund that houses the proceeds from criminal, from the process of recovering assets from criminals. Through the CARA process, the Department of Defense was allocated an additional R1 billion. The Department of Police as well, another R1 billion. We've made a 800 million rand contribution to the budget of the Border Management Authority over the next 3 years, in addition to their baseline to secure the ports of entry. And we're spending a lot of effort through the budget facility of infrastructure, working on departments, on infrastructure projects that can help deal with some of the challenges in the justice ecosystem. I think there's still quite a bit of work to do, and it's I would say the lack of funding is not the issue. I think it's about building on interagency cooperation. It's about strengthening our prosecution system, which is, I think, one of the weakest aspects of the overall ecosystem. And it's about greater accountability for the resources that are being allocated to many of these agencies.
And like you mentioned, I think why we did take that long to get off the FATF grey list was essentially those issues around prosecution of those criminal cases. You've described this as being a fiscal turning point in South Africa's fiscal trajectory. And a lot of that is being anchored in primary surpluses. I think this is the third year of a primary surplus, and this is projected to grow over the medium-term framework. But what gives you confidence that the primary balance will remain in surplus even beyond the medium term, with some of the growth risks still pending?
Yeah, I think we're pretty confident that we'll be able to secure a growing primary surplus, which is a target we set for ourselves about 3 years ago. And the reason we set ourselves that target is because that's the way, from a fiscal accounting perspective, to secure a peak in the debt to GDP ratio, and then for that ratio to start coming down. So I think from a expenditure restraint point of view, which is one part of the primary balance, as you know, it's revenue less non-interest expenditure. So from an expenditure restraint point of view, I think this budget confirms that expenditure restraint is quite well anchored, and some of our efforts around targeted and responsible savings will further assist there. And then from a revenue point of view, I think we are being very measured about how we are approaching revenue going forward. We've been very careful not to rely on any of what people are anticipating around the commodity revenue. So we have not penciled any of that in any significant measure over the next 3 years, and I think that provides a potential upside risk as well. So from our point of view, a growing primary surplus is now a well-entrenched feature of fiscal policy. And as you know, the last time we had a primary surplus before the last 3 years was in 2009. So we spent a lot of time with what was effectively not fiscal management that wasn't quite up to the standard that we needed in order to ensure that our debt metrics are kept under control and kept reasonable.
So fingers crossed there for that commodity price windfall to hold us for another year. And I think what gives the market quite a lot of comfort is that we avoided the temptation to plug that into recurrent expenditure, and quite a big portion actually went to infrastructure spending. I think one of the areas that the market and investors used to give Treasury a bit of flack for was that we didn't get a lot of detail around how we were going to fix the financial distress in many of the municipalities. And I think this budget really aired that concept quite well, coming out saying that 63% of municipalities are in financial distress. And I know that there are programs at play to enable the firmest standing municipalities to aid some of the underperforming ones. Is there a risk that we could get a bit of a dilution of skills from the better performing municipalities, individuals there now also having to look at your poorer performing municipalities. And I know historically there has been some talk around potentially consolidating the 257 municipalities that we have in South Africa. Is this on the cards for the next couple of years? Is it something that South Africa can achieve within a 5 to 10 year framework, and would that help on the financial issues?
Well, as you know, the Department of Cooperative Governance is busy in the final stages of a white paper on local government that will propose some of these more fundamental reforms to the entire local government ecosystem. And that will be finalized this year, and I think as people engage with that, I think that will provide a much better line of sight on what's going to happen structurally to that sphere of government. From our perspective, we've made a few important changes that we think will help. Number one, we are in the conditional grant space, where we give grants, infrastructure grants to municipalities to build new infrastructure. We are saying to those municipalities that have a poor track record of spending, they are not going to receive those grants. Those grants are going to go either to a district that's better capacitated or to the DBSA or other implementing agents. I think that's the one part. On the equitable share, where we have, which municipalities receive in order to maintain basic services, and there's the spending outcomes there are quite poor. Those we have been, we've been a lot more interventionist in withholding those in cases where municipalities are not paying water boards, not paying ESCOM, not paying pension funds, and so on. And that we will continue to do. But the most important reform, I think, is what we are putting forward for metropolitan municipalities this year, which is where we've introduced a new incentive to get these municipalities to reinvest the revenue that they collect from their basic trading services like water and electricity back into those businesses, so that those water utilities and water infrastructure and electricity infrastructure is properly maintained. And we've allocated 54 billion rand for that. So within our sphere of control on the financial management side, we've made this a big priority. But I think to your earlier point, there are some big structural changes that are required that is going to be a very important part of that discussion around the white paper.
Yeah, I think the market is also quite comforted by the fact that there is a lid on expenditure right now. I think the only point of concern really for investors was the continuation of the social relief of distress grant, and I know more work will be done in order to reform it into almost a livelihood grant. And I think it's quite comforting to know that there are also steps to try and link it into employment incentives. How far are we away from doing this with some other grants? So I know with the child grant, they found 35,000 fraudulent cases, and I think that's great that we clean up on the fraudulent side of it. Are we approaching a state where we can start to think about grants on a conditional basis? So, linking the child grant to educational outcomes like they've done in Brazil, or are we still quite away from there? Is it politically a contentious issue?
Well, as you know, our grants do have some eligibility criteria. And the question is whether we should strengthen some of those eligibility criteria, and I think that's an important conversation to have. The other conversation is around the your earlier point around the fraud that we are seeing in the social grant system. And we have worked with the department as well as SASSA to really clamp down on that and to make sure that there's a lot more verification of beneficiaries, so that individuals who are entitled to a social grant receive that social grant. And then I think there has to be a conversation around the sort of long-term fiscal sustainability of adding new grants. And of course, we have been talking about a basic income grant, for example, for some time, adding new grants in an environment where there are 27 million grant beneficiaries paid every month, And of course, in a low growth environment, that comes at a significant fiscal cost as well. It's a fundamental part of our social compact, I would say, that the social grant system is well funded, and that we eliminate social grant fraud in as far as possible. But I also think that we must keep an eye on the long-term sustainability of this, and it comes back to your question about growth. And how do we ensure that we create the kind of work opportunities for many of those individuals and their families so that you reduce the long-term burden on the state?
You know, there's been a lot of talk about the world economy shifting into a new world order, global trade fragmentation and reorientation. It's a world where some of these 19th century concepts around industrialization, resource imperialism are now being revived. From the Treasury perspective and the fiscal angle, how does Treasury think about fiscal positioning in a world where geopolitics is increasingly influencing the direction of trade and investment?
Well, I think what it forces us to do is to think about the implications or the relationship between fiscal sustainability and sovereignty. And I think the path that we are charting out now, which is one that has a lot more fiscal credibility and integrity, allows us a greater degree of sovereignty, and it forces us to focus on ensuring that we are doing as much as we can to grow the economy, to maintain stable public finances, so that to the extent that there is a less supportive global backdrop or the geopolitics of the day disrupt the global order, there is a degree of domestic resilience that can help us to navigate that period more elegantly.
I just want to check if we've got 5 minutes for questions. Can we go ahead? Cool. Economists have a long list of questions. I could go on, but I just want to give the audience a chance to ask any questions to the DG. I think there will be a mic going around. You can just indicate by a show of hands.
Thank you. Hi, Duncan. It's Maya Fisher-French. I wanted to ask you about the grant system. Has Treasury ever considered having a blanket grant that every single person in the country gets without any verification, and then just reducing the primary rebate? Because to me that just feels like it's an easier way to administer than all the costs of verification and fraud.
Hi, Duncan. Jaburo from Momentum. Just to get a sense around just two key variables as we look forward. One is the wage bill growth, as well as GDP, just the confidence levels, because those seem to be, we're always quite optimistic, as we project forward, and the actual results sometimes do not basically come ahead of the expectations. And just your reaction around some of the reactions where people are saying, this is a great budget, but it's more about balancing the books than really accelerating economic growth. Your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I think we can take one more, and then the DG can respond to those, and we'll see if there's time for another round.
Good morning, Nompilo Zulu from Business Day. I got a couple of questions. I'm just wondering if the government is concerned about the growing reliance on social grants as household finances weaken. And also, I would like to know how much of a risk does household finances distress pose to the country's fiscal sustainability, and how vulnerable is South Africa's test base to household financial stress and slow income growth?
Okay, I think we'll close it there so that the DG just has enough time to respond.
Thank you, Sanisha, and thank you for those questions. So I'll start at the end. I'm not sure I got the second question. But look, one of the points we make in this budget review, to the point about the vulnerability of our overall tax system, one of the points we make in this budget review is around the personal income tax burden that personal income taxpayers are carrying, and the fact that we are concerned about that, and that is what informed of course, to a large part, the fact that we've given bracket creep relief, and it's also informed some of the adjustments of the tax thresholds and so on. So certainly the idea that both corporates and households are quite overburdened from a tax perspective, and you can see it in our tax to GDP ratio, is something that we are very sensitive to, and something that we continue to monitor. And I think the combined impact of the tax announcements that we made on Wednesday, I think goes a long way to addressing some of that. I made the point earlier on social grants that I think I think the grants that we have at the moment, the child support grant, the old age pension grant, the disability grant, I think they have shown themselves to be very well targeted to address the underlying issues that they intend to address. Our main concern at this stage is the individuals that are accessing social grants that shouldn't be. And we've already identified around 3 billion rands in savings over the next few years, and we think that there's more there as we ensure that we do proper verification. And once we start tightening up the social grant system and eliminate social grant fraud, I think that also gives us an opportunity to revisit some of these social grants, their levels, and also potentially look into other areas of spending that require support. There was a question about balancing the books versus growth. I would make 2 points there. The one is that balancing, in our view at least, balancing the books is an absolutely necessary condition for higher growth. It brings down interest rates, it brings down the cost of capital, it brings down household credit, it gives confidence for businesses to invest. And so you have to have a fiscal sustainability in order for the economy to grow. But having said that, we also make a significant number of investments, both in terms of resource allocations, as well as regulatory reforms on the infrastructure side. There's in excess of 11 billion being allocated to Transnet to fix our iron ore corridor, our coal corridor, the Durban port. There's about 36 billion that's in additional funds going to PRASA in order to fix commuter rail. So we wanted to ensure that this budget both balances the books, but also allocates significant resources towards infrastructure so that we're able to raise our growth levels. I think we are fairly confident in our growth forecasts. We, from this year onwards, are publishing a forecast error analysis, which will be included in every budget, that will give you comfort that our forecasts are in line from an error perspective with where we would like them to be. And then in terms of the first question by Maya around a flat rate versus a primary rebate, that's not something that we've explicitly investigated. I think it's something we'd have to look at, obviously, the cost, the savings benefit from foregoing the one versus the costs associated with a kind of basic flat rate. One of the challenges with a basic flat income support of any sort is, one, it is very sensitive to what happens with beneficiary numbers over time, as well as inflation, although that's less of a problem now that inflation is well anchored. And of course, if you do that, you lose the targeting effect of some of the current grants. So the benefits that we're seeing in terms of the research that has been done on the impacts of the child support grant and the old age pension grant from a targeting perspective, a lot of that would be lost. So there's quite a lot of work that one would have to do to see whether that kind of shift actually improves the social security system or is net negative because of the losses on the targeting side as well as the fiscal risks we will introduce.
DG, I think we could keep you here all morning, but we want to respect your time. And thank you so much for taking the time out to spend the morning with us. We really appreciate it. And once again, congratulations to you and your team for a very well-balanced budget. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Sanisha. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. All right. Yes, Parliament is calling, and I know that there may be a few people that do need to follow the DG as well out. I just ask that you do so quietly. I must say, personally, as a consumer and a fellow citizen of this country, the recognition that we are taxed a bit too much was very welcomed. I was in Qatar earlier this year, and the idea of zero tax is very appealing. Maybe this is something that we'll get to one day, we hope, but nonetheless. So we're going to move on to a panel discussion right now, and it is a discussion that is just going to look at all the risks that, of course, Sanisha did highlight, and perhaps even a few more, and just help us better understand and opine on how we can ensure that we take those risks into account, and that, you know, some of the allocations and the money that we're talking about spending right now is money that is spent in a manner that future-proofs South Africa, so makes South Africa better tomorrow. And so can I please ask my fellow contributors to this discussion to come on stage, beginning with the CEO of Momentum Corporate, Mr. Dumo Mbete. So you're welcome. A warm applause for your own, please. In the house, we also have... Yes, please take your seat. We also have Dr. Roy Havman from the Bureau of Economic Research. So please join us on stage. And we do have Sanisha as well, who I'm glad to announce will be reverting back to the chief economist role, where she'll answer the questions and not make me feel like I'll soon be redundant in asking the questions. You did a great job, by the way. Thank you. And of course, this is also an opportunity where perhaps we'll have a little bit more time to engage in questions. I know there was a gentleman here in the front who wanted to ask a question that he didn't get to, so maybe you want to raise it as a comment, so perhaps it will be useful for someone on the stage to answer. And so let's go. And Sanisha, I think I want to pick up with what you said. You spoke to the DG quite a bit about growth. Oh, actually, before I do know that we did have on the invite list that we'd be joined by the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Dr. Musi Maimane. Unfortunately, schedule changes. He wasn't able to join us today. Nonetheless, I do think that we do have an expert lineup of minds on the stage who will be able to do as great of a job, I'm sure, in answering some of the pressing questions, but more importantly, sketching that picture of a better tomorrow for South Africa. And so, as I was saying, Sanisha, you spoke to the DG quite a bit about growth, and you hemorrhaged on the fact that it is slow, notwithstanding some of the commitments that they are making to try and deal with the finances, to try and get our debt situation in check. Growth is slow. And so the question that I have to you is that he said primary surplus, we continue to see this being on our radar and our forecast for many years to come. What do you say about that in terms of the realistic situation that this government is in right now in managing those finances while growth is not pulling to the level that it should be?
Thanks, Fifi. So I think, it all boils down to the efficiency of spending, ensuring that we can cap the level of expenditure. Even in the discussion, we spoke a little bit about that revenue windfall that came through from your corporate income taxes because of the way that platinum and gold prices have performed in the last while, and that led to an overrun on your gross tax receipts of about 21 billion odd. Now, traditionally, the markets would have worried that that money would have been squandered and given to recurrent expenditure. This time around, it was allocated to infrastructure spending, and we all understand the needs for infrastructure spending in the country. For a long period of time since global financial crisis, there's been a very high level of underspending on infrastructure,
Sure.
Leading to quite a bit of degradation in some areas. The second issue is around really on the expense side, maintaining that level over time And that essentially will allow us to achieve that primary surplus. So we've achieved a primary surplus. This will be the third year, and that is anticipated to grow. I think the concern, and this was raised in the investor call after the budget, is that we keep saying that debt is stabilizing, but the peak is actually getting a bit higher to the extent, one of the investors remarked that it's now almost at 79%. We're approaching 80%, and we know that there are levels by the International Monetary Fund that suggest by around 80%. You do get yourself into a space where it almost becomes a little bit unsustainable to try and pay off the interest on that debt, and at the same time improve service delivery and expand on infrastructure. So I think, in a world environment that could potentially turn sour, if market conditions deteriorate, and Treasury did allude to this in their budgetary framework in terms of a more negative type of scenario, I think the pace of fiscal consolidation would still be there, but slow. So I think we have turned the fiscal corner in a number of senses, and I think that that maintaining of the expenditure control will allow us to see the deficit continuing to narrow, even if growth conditions falter from here, and even if we don't necessarily see a windfall of that nature being replicated in future fiscal years. So I think we can't always expect that the revenue windfall is going to bail us out, but what we can control is our expenses. We can control moving more money from recurrent into capital expenditure, and from that perspective, I think the budget gave us a lot of comfort that we are moving in that direction.
Sure, and perhaps also the comfort that comes from this fiscal anchor that the DG was speaking about, although I have a few questions as to how they decide on exactly what should be legislated and what is a solid plan for maintaining finances and stability. That looks like another discussion that will arise. But Duma, to your, I'll ask a question on growth as well, because this budget has also made quite a number of promises to a number of citizens regarding pensions, healthcare, social support, and all of that. In the event that the growth continues to go at the current level, can the country afford to deliver?
Look, I think the reality, Fifi, is that the current trajectory, where economic growth is lower than population growth, it's not sustainable. So it's an indefinite ability to meet those commitments, and it's a growing set of commitments. I think from a social perspective, the DG has highlighted, some of the critical commitments that we need to deliver on, but doing that from a limited and quite a narrow tax base. So if you look at, from an individual tax perspective, corporate tax perspective, you have a very small number of entities and individuals having to basically fund this commitment. And because of that, you then have the knock-on impact of then having to borrow quite a lot in order to fund that, as Anisha has pointed out. But definitely the right things are happening. And I believe that there's momentum in the right direction, in the sense that, and I think it does require a bit of patience from all of us, because the actions that have been taken, around addressing the fiscal dynamics, those actions are now leading to lower borrowing costs for government. Sanisha has also made the point just around the ability to now start shifting spend away from, your expenditure, expense base, but actually being able to shift that to capital. And we saw an allocation of 1 trillion to infrastructure, as an example. And those are some of that's the room you start to give yourself to be able to invest in elements that are actually going to drive, underlying growth. Look, I think you also have a tax base and participants in that tax base who are maybe under significant strain. There are elements of, tax exhaustion. So it was also, quite welcome to see some elements of tax relief, with the highlight being the bracket creep adjustments, just to try and at least lower that level of burden. But I think fundamentally, it has to be a growth-focused agenda. We've given ourselves, as a country now, some room to be able to invest in the elements that are going to enable us to drive that growth.
No, for sure. But we also can't ignore the fact that this is a budget that was delivered in an election year, as you have said. Politics and policy, an important element of where we do go as a country today as well as tomorrow. But maybe, Roy, you can just quantify for us exactly, the policy uncertainty that has been spoken about in the past, the instability that we have experienced in the past. Exactly how much does that cost us in rands and cents as a country?
Yes, absolutely. So we have an ABSA index, which basically asks ordinary businesses, how do you feel about uncertainty in the economy? As part of the business confidence indexes that we bring out. And one of the questions, which is a really interesting one, is to what extent is political uncertainty holding you back on investing and growth? And what we saw was when the GNU came in, that fell quite significantly, because I think a lot of businesses felt that the GNU was bringing about a period of certainty. But then in the last year or so, it actually has risen again. And we are very pleased to see that it does seem to be coming down again, but it's very clear to us that directly links into investment decisions. And that's not surprising at all, which is that obviously if businesses are uncertain about the future, they're not going to invest, and they're not going to invest particularly in the long term. So that index, unfortunately, is still on the higher side. I think this budget, we haven't obviously seen the results of that after the budget. I think this budget will help give investors a lot of confidence that the Treasury is making the right decisions. I completely agree that this is a situation where what has actually happened is it's a bit of a windfall. To be fair to the Treasury, though, they have been doing the right things over the last 5 years. They've tried to keep expenditure under control. They've tried to keep debt under control. They haven't really managed to do it. They've been trying very hard. But these commodity price windfalls and the sudden increase in revenue that they hadn't quite expected, and a sudden, just a little bit of a bubble in nominal GDP, and the reduction in inflation target helping debt service costs come down, these are things that this is just a very nice period of time that actually really just helps the fiscal position improve. But I completely agree that if you want to deliver on certainty for investors, you have to maintain this momentum. You have to actually show debt coming down. You actually have to deliver, and you have to actually execute on what's in the budget.
Sure, and that policy. I was in Cape Town again actually last week, and the JSE was hosting an event, and quite a number of foreign investors from all over the world were here. And naturally, there was conversation around how some of these investors have found a new home in the capital markets. I mean, we're seeing what the rand is doing. We're seeing what the bond market has been doing as well. One particular investor said that for the first time, they were getting calls about putting money in South Africa from clients that had never even put money in South Africa before. So that was a good thing. But that's the financial economy. It's not the real economy where jobs are created and where that growth is derived from. And so that's what we need to start seeing a lot more of. I want to shift the focus to SMEs. Finance Minister was quite proud in some of the pronouncements that he did make for small businesses in the speech. And Mo, coming to you with regards to what he did say and some of the relief that he did present to small businesses, do you reckon it's enough?
Yeah, look, SMEs are the engine for addressing the unemployment crisis in our country. So to that extent, I think any effort driven towards better enabling SMEs to deliver on their objective is effort, well directed. And SMEs face a number of challenges. I think the first and probably most critical one is around, access to funding. And yes, it's about interest rates, keeping those interest rates low, but it's also the structure and the nature of that funding. How much of it is patient capital that can be there at the seeding phase, and then longer term capital that can be invested into sustaining the growth of those SMEs. So that's like the first layer, which is around survival. Mm-hmm. The second layer is this sort of admin burden that SMEs face, right? So SMEs need more and more time to be able to actually focus on the business of running the business. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where the budget really hit some good notes around VAT, for example, where that threshold has now shifted from 1 million to 2.3 million, and also the revenue base tax eligibility shifting from 350 to 600,000. So that does mean that your smaller, especially your micro enterprises, are now going to have a bit more capacity to focus on actually driving growth, going out there, selling their products, rather than what is quite an extensive administrative burden. Because remember, a lot of these enterprises don't have the space to hire a big accounting department, a big tax department. So anything that you add by way of administrative burden ends up falling on the shoulders of the actual owner. Then I think the last element, which I think again is starting to get addressed, is the environment within which those SMEs operate. For those businesses to be able to thrive, they need stable power provision. They need stable, water supply, stable infrastructure, logistics, etc. So I think those elements that have been focused on again as part of this budget, going all the way down to how we ensure that municipalities are effective, then start to also address the environmental aspects. So it's multidimensional, but I do think, again, that there are steps moving in the right direction. But I think point number one around funding continues to be the big barrier that SMEs face.
Sure. And of course, I mean, these are SMEs as well. You mentioned energy, you mentioned logistics, roads. So these SMEs that operate in that ecosystem and that landscape that is also critical for driving the growth of South Africa today and tomorrow. And the DG, and we all know about Operation Vulindlela, the government's reform plan now in its second phase, hoped or seen to be one of the panaceas or tailwinds to really get us out this rut that we're in right now. And Roy, I want to come back to you regarding OV, infrastructure, SMEs, participation thereof, but more specifically with OV, in your view, how's it doing right now, and what do you reckon are one or some of the reforms that can really unlock its true potential?
Yes, so I mean, obviously OV is doing quite well in certain areas. I mean, I think we can all agree that electricity has been a huge success. I mean, it's amazing to think that South Africans, we're very quick to bemoan load shedding, and then it's gone away and we don't even talk about it. We switch on the lights and we make food at night and we forget that we had load shedding. Actually, not so long ago. And that's actually a result of really good and important reforms that have happened, the increase in renewable energy, and that's moving ahead at pace, and there is some discussion in the budget about other things that still need to happen in electricity. On logistics, that's sort of the thing that we don't see, which is that, the mine, they call it pit to port, is the mine able to get its minings, particularly the new stuff, particularly manganese, which is really quite in demand from a global perspective as we're moving to electricity. Can we get that? We sit on 60% of the world's manganese. Can we get that from Sishen to Saldanha? Is there a railway line that works? And currently that's not as great as it should be. That said, there is progress in that direction. However, there are still things that are now popping up and that we maybe have not spent as much time as we should have on, which is naturally water. And I think that what is happening in Johannesburg has shown us that the problems are actually quite complex. So the big reform in OV, and I think this is a really important part of the OV agenda, is to think about the last mile of water supply. So the interesting thing about water is that there's generally enough water coming in from Lesotho Highlands Water Program under the TCTA, and they're doing stuff to make that better, but it's actually that last kilometer just before your house that there's a problem. And that last kilometer is the municipality's responsibility.
Sure.
And the budget does go into some detail about what they're doing in that regard, and the big thing, which I think the DG also mentioned, is something called trading services reform, which is essentially making sure that Joburg water is ring-fenced and that it is held accountable for the money that it spends. Somebody was saying that they watched the press conference on the water crisis, and they were quite struck that there was a politician from the city, a politician from the province, and a politician from the national government, and they were kind of all blaming each other. We need to get a world where we ask who is in charge of water in Johannesburg. Do they have enough money? Are we holding them accountable? Is there an agency that can do this? Is it protected from political interference? And that's kind of where OV Phase 2 is going. And I think it's going in the right direction. It's quite slow, but I think that we are getting there.
I wanted to say that we're not talking about load shedding anymore, but of course we are talking about water shedding, and you mentioned it right now. And, you know, the water crisis, as some saying, you know, it's a problem, huge one right now. And it also speaks to the infrastructure and investments that are needed in this space to ensure that it's growth enhancing in future. We're speaking about funding, and to the point that you were also making around funding and infrastructure and the role of pension funds potentially to plug the funding gap here. And a role that perhaps they have not stepped up to or are not stepping up to as much as would have been envisioned by the government and Treasury when allowances were made to allow pensions to play a bigger space in that ecosystem. In your view, why not? And in your view, how do we change this?
Well, Fifi, there's a lot of demands on that asset management pile of funds that they're sitting on. But I mean, ultimately, as an asset manager, you want to provide the best possible returns on a risk-adjusted basis for your clients. And when we think about, you know, maybe investment in industrial policy, investment in building African corridors to facilitate trade and logistics, maybe on a bigger infrastructure drive, we have to take a couple of things into account that make those asset classes a bit more nuanced. So infrastructure as an example, we know that government has come out with 2 infrastructure bonds. It was almost double oversubscribed. So a lot of appetite for that, and they are expected to roll this further out on a quarterly basis in order to facilitate more infrastructure spending. But when we think about something like infrastructure, it can be quite illiquid. We also have to build in some kind of credit risk premium. So what government is trying to do there is to have some kind of credit guarantee vehicle that's in place. If you think about other types of projects in, related to industrialization or building some of these transport corridors, you'd need to take into account some kind of public-private partnership, some kind of first loss agreement, so that the pension fund itself doesn't necessarily take that initial hit if something does go wrong. Also, some of these asset classes tend to be quite specialized in nature, so you do need to have, a team to be able to go out and see some of these projects and see the viability and assess them on a regular basis. So I think that they, from a funding perspective, there can be a lot of risk. Going into Africa means that there are new regulatory risks that come about, currency risks that come about, political risks that come about. And so I think that's essentially the hurdles that we need to overcome in order to try and reorient some of those pension fund monies, and at the same time protect the end client, ensuring that they do get the best risk-adjusted return. Because at the end of the day, infrastructure or logistics, etc., or industrialized projects are competing with, for example, equities or bonds that do tend to deliver at this point in time at quite a decent return on a risk-adjusted basis.
Okay, but I do want to talk about going into other jurisdictions right now, and it is something that you touched on with the DG as well, noting what is happening globally and some of the changing relationships dynamics that we do have with certain countries in this world right now. Beyond that, the countries are putting sovereignty first. Many countries in the world, and the DG says South Africa is doing the same, such that should anything change by way of a trade relation with any partner in the world, we've built up enough domestic resiliency to be able to be okay. With that said, that's going to take time. And I want your reflections as a chief economist in this country right now on the shifting geopolitics and the trade dynamics. And maybe you can just lay bare to us how vulnerable we are right now to the changing game.
So I think, it was quite easy to neatly package economic risks and geopolitical risks. And today the two have become very intertwined. Economic policy and foreign policy have to start interacting with one another. The reforms that Roy has mentioned are great to facilitate domestic-led priorities and growth. But South Africa is a small open economy and we don't operate in isolation. And so in conjunction with some of these great reforms that are happening in the energy, some in the logistics and some in the water space now, incrementally so, needs to also be facilitated with more foreign policy acumen. We've got 43 trade offices across the world. They're not all fully facilitated with trade representatives. And so, take in India, for example, they managed to get 4 good trade deals on the table in the last year with the UK, European Union, I think it was New Zealand and Oman. We've got some, in the agriculture space, but I think we need to be able to do more. But we also need to be able to facilitate those offices to do more. And I think we've lost a little bit in terms of foreign policy dynamics in SA. And this new world order, global trade fragmenting, reorienting, we need to be able to position ourselves quite well. Even if we do get our fiscal house in order, our structural reform in order, we are still operating in a global environment.
And Dumo, if this is the new normal, right? If we accept that the volatility is here to stay and the shifting alliances are here to stay, does that excite you by way of prospects of what this means for where we're going, or does that worry you, and why?
Look, I think it excites me. Look, I'm more comfortable with change, and I think as a nation we've become a lot more resilient, and our ability to navigate change, and deliver positive outcomes, in that environment is tried and tested. And we've also, I think, been able to demonstrate an ability to focus on what is within our control. And again, the budget that was tabled it really starts that focus around what are the things that we can actually drive, take accountability for. I think a lot of the challenges we face as a nation from a financial policy perspective are probably more internal, and even from an economic growth perspective, it's internal rather than external forces that are at the heart of that. So I think improving our ability to deliver, the plans are great. Operation Vulindlela hits all the right notes in terms of the focus areas, a partnership approach in terms of how we deliver between all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. But ultimately, it boils down to disciplined execution.
Sure.
So, that's my hope. If we hit the mark on disciplined execution, then we can be excited. If we miss the mark on that, then I think we should all be worried.
Sure. Because some are also saying that, the upside is the fact that if things continue to reshuffle and rejig and go wild internationally, then you'll have commodity prices that continue to strengthen, which means that our currency continues to get stronger, and perhaps even our bond market and the cost of borrowing continues to fall. So it's an upside for South Africa. With that said, though, I'm just wondering, Roy, before we open up to the room for questions or any comments that they may have, whether you see this scenario of the new normal, a ruptured ecosystem by some people's accounts, as it were, being a challenge in any place in our financial books that we should be worried about.
Yeah, I think as you've highlighted, this new normal is actually quite good for South Africa.
Okay.
And that's just remarkably because we're a big commodity exporter. That's naturally what we've been doing. So the gold price going up is great for us. Strangely enough, what happened in Venezuela brought down the oil price. And so you had this double terms of trade shock of an improvement in the gold price and platinum and silver, and a reduction in the oil price. And that's really good for us. In actual fact, the risk is that we go back to life is normal again, and we go back to commodity prices coming back down again to, I think, more long-run levels, and the oil price perhaps going back up again. And the risk is actually then, I think exactly as was highlighted earlier, that this global positive moment disappears for us, and then we are left, and people ask, oh, but you don't have water, you don't have electricity, you don't have ports that work, you don't have anything. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that this is actually a bit of a cyclical boom, and we must continue to work, and I completely agree, on the structural issues to make sure that the economy can generate growth despite what's going on globally.
Okay.
And I think that is the big challenge, is to make sure we still deal with the structural underlying growth issues.
Okay. Before we start wrapping things up and getting into closing comments, I'm just handing it over to you as the audience members. Any questions or any comments for any of the panelists at this stage? So don't be shy, please. Ungasabi, I want to see your hand, not your finger. Thank you, sir. So there's two. And I'm going to give it to that gentleman there because you did have your hand up before and you didn't get the opportunity to ask.
Thanks very much. I think some on the panel are used to getting questions from me. I think the point that I wanted to make to the DG was what a difference 12 months makes. So it's great to be where we are, and we are a bit of a nerdy bunch here, and I thought there were two aspects in the budget that we need to celebrate. The first is the successful launching of the FLAC instruments, which has effectively taken the implicit debt of the banks off the national balance sheets, which I think is awesome. And the issuance of the R2053, which is a very long bond, which has been significantly oversubscribed in FIFI. Those are the things that we invest our life annuities in. And so my request to the DG was we really want more of those. So perhaps Sanisha can comment on those two. For Dumo, in the budget speech, there's a proposal that we take unclaimed assets and put them in a central fund, centrally managed. So I wanted your views in terms of whether you thought this was a good idea. And maybe because the politicians aren't in the room, Roy, maybe you can answer this question and we'll have sort of Chatham House rules. The RAF is certainly something that worries me. In the budget, we talk about a 426 billion rand liability sitting in the RAF in 28-29. We've heard the commission, and it's not pretty what's happening in the road accident fund. I mean, for 300 billion rands worth of expenditure and lawyers getting a 20% contingency fee, we can see why they lobbying hard to maintain the status quo. And I also worry that a reliance on a fuel levy in a world where we're moving to electric cars and much more efficient cars is that revenue stream is not going to move with the underlying liability. And so I'm starting to wonder if we should be moving to a world of compulsory private insurance for the road accident fund, where we all pay a premium based on our risk, we're incentivized to drive better, and we create a national insurer to sort of cover those people who aren't insured or pedestrians. Isn't it time, with a 426 billion rand problem, to start to think very seriously around how we fix this? Thanks.
Okay. Quite a balanced set of questions reflecting on the good and the bad. There were so many. I'm going to get the panelists to answer them right now. And perhaps, Sanisha, we begin with you.
Okay, so on the first question, Rowan, with regards to the banks, I'll make a broad statement that this time around, we didn't really see a lot of emphasis being made on contingent liabilities that are faced by Treasury, and it could be in part due to positive issues that have developed. So, Eskom printing its first level of profitability. I think Transnet is still in a net loss, but we're starting to see that railway improvements are coming through, port improvements are coming through. On the banks specifically, if you take the angle from the banks rather than Treasury, I mean, banks have been an attractive, an overweight from many foreign investors and local investors, and I think that just strengthens the argument even more. On the longer dated bonds, I mean, Treasury in their post-investor call basically suggested that their focus now is going to be on the infrastructure bonds because that's ring-fenced for certain infrastructure projects. There was a lot of question marks around whether we will get more Sukuk issuances. They will basically look at the market when the market is ready to put those in. So I think that will continue. There's always obviously appetite for those bonds to come through. And given the redemption profile, which looks quite hefty from 2027 onwards, they've committed to continuing with switch auctions. I think the main risk there, and this was a question that also came up in that investor call, is right now, as Roy pointed out, we've got favorable market conditions. What if this sours in the next while? Should government have actually taken this opportunity to pay down the debt rather than cut issuance? Because then next year they will probably have to raise that again in order to meet that redemption profile and to do switch auctions. Right now, as current market conditions look, that would have been easily digestible. But what if market conditions do sour on the back of geopolitical risk events or other factors?
Yeah. Because I think that they said that they're going to be coming to the market less.
So on
And so what does that mean?
Yeah, so on the infrastructure side, they're planning to do that once a quarter. The switch auctions is really to swap out your shorter term debt into longer term issuance. And obviously, as borrowing costs come down and the risk premium comes down, there would be more appetite from Treasury to do that. But I think the risk is that what happens if the risk premium actually starts reversing and ticking up later down the line? As Roy points out, then the market very quickly looks at what is going wrong in SA on the structural factors, because now the cyclical windfall has gone away.
Sure, okay. Dumo, the question on the unclaimed assets and the strategy of government in using them.
Look, it's quite a topical matter, and I think it's a matter that's very close to my heart in the sense that, it speaks to the promise that we make as financial services players to say, in the event of something unfortunate happening, that there's a promise that will be delivered on. Or if someone gets to retirement age or they're changing jobs, they can, get access of their funds. And the fact that we do sit as a country with an unclaimed benefits pool, which is quite significant, is something that actually worries all of us in the industry, so government and industry alike. And ultimately, the goal is to ensure that those funds do eventually reach the intended beneficiaries. So I think from a regulatory perspective, there's been quite a lot of work done just around limiting future instances of unclaimed benefits. So the introduction of the policyholder protection rules, which do require that, whether you're a retirement fund or you're issuing a group life policy, you need to now retain underlying contact data, underlying identification data for the individuals, is a big one. The second one is this focus on ensuring that, all participants in these funds actually complete beneficiary nomination forms. And the industry has also been, quite proactive in the sense of ensuring that members are able to do this digitally as well. So we are seeing higher and higher rates of completion of beneficiary nomination forms. I think the two-part system as well, because if you wind the clock back a few years, the levels of engagement that people had with their retirement funds was very low. But come 1 September 2024, and then suddenly we're all getting this influx of calls. We are all using digital solutions for members to transact. And that does mean now, I think holistically, we have more accurate cell phone numbers, and that sort of detail where we can actually reach the end member and ensure that the right actions are taken going forward. But parallel to that, there is the reality of a backlog of historical unclaimed benefits, which I think, again, we all put energy and investment into. We work with tracing agencies, with the various boards of trustees across the country. They appoint tracing agencies, and in some cases more than one, to try and get to a stage where we can, find that person who might be in a village, maybe even in Mozambique or Lesotho, where the benefits were due. So that work continues, and in instances we do see those historical balances reducing. Now, what is envisaged, in this particular instance, is almost like a centralization of that, centralize the data, centralize the assets. That could have its positive, but it might also end up detracting from some of the efforts that are being driven, at an individual entity level. So I do believe we'll find the answer somewhere in between, and I think the paper also does refer to engagements that are going to be taking place between the relevant stakeholders, just to ensure that we are able to get to an answer that addresses, the benefits as well as the risks effectively.
Sure, and also ensures that measures and safeguards around governance are strongly put in place.
Because I think we cannot underestimate fraud risk.
Yes.
And that, and that's something we work very closely again with the tracing agencies. Yes, you want the money to reach the beneficiaries, but it must be the intended and the right beneficiaries. So we can't only celebrate that the balances are reducing, but we need to also be able to celebrate that the balances are reducing for the right reasons. And I think those are some of the elements which I believe even the policymakers are considering to say, look, this has to be well thought through and we need to manage it together.
All right. But Roy, to you, the idea about reform for the road accident fund against the industry and where it's going with electric cars and all that, but also against the mounting pressure on its balance sheet and whole issues around governance and how it's being managed right now.
Yes, an excellent question. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that happened in Twin Peaks, that the reforms that took place a few years ago that haven't really been picked up on because it's quite a slow-moving reform, is this idea that state-owned entities must be subject to the same levels of regulation as privately sector-owned institutions. And we're slowly going in that direction with the idea, that for example, and it's actually from I'm now using the land bank as an example, from the land bank side is they actually want to be regulated by the Reserve Bank as a prudentially regulated entity. And to the Road Accident Fund, they are actually technically regulated by the Reserve Bank under the Prudential Authority. The Road Accident Fund Act sets up the SARB as the regulator, and there is thus nothing really stopping the system moving in the direction that you're suggesting, which is that actually we move much more towards a private insurance type model for the Road Accident Fund. You can think of an extreme version of that, for example, which is that the Road Accident Fund levy be used as a way of subsidizing compulsory third-party insurance. I certainly personally think it would be a lot better way of using the Road Accident Fund levy than what it's being used for at the moment. It's not quite clear what happens. I can say these things now because the politicians aren't in the room. It's not quite sure what happens to the Road Accident Fund levy at the moment because, there are so many problems with the Road Accident Fund. So I don't think money is the problem because you've got this levy that you can start thinking about and you could perhaps even have some kind of a subsidized product. Government did play around with subsidized products, subsidizing private insurance products with the loan guarantee scheme. That didn't completely work. It did have some positives. I think 20 billion was lent out in the end, but that's not completely out of reach. And I really think that these huge fiscal risks like the Road Accident Fund need to be dealt with. There are those things under the mattress that, if you don't spring clean them, we're going to have more fiscal problems later.
Okay. But, sir, I know you had your hand up.
I think, as I've been listening to the conversations this morning, one of the casualties of the budget has been the public employment initiative that government has had. And people in those who are working in the social sector have proven to government how impactful this has been to issues like the growing number of youth unemployment, crime, and I've heard the panel speaking more about the conditions and the environment that needs to be created for business to operate. Those businesses are operating in an environment where there's crime, there's rampant crime. And these programs have been assisting in alleviating those problems. Now it seems as if government is shifting away from that. And the organizations that have been working, and it's been mobilizing a groundswell of organization, grassroots initiatives on the ground that are beginning to say, let's take responsibility for some of the challenges that the country is. Now moving away and taking away that money is really taking this initiative where the whole of society is beginning to say, let's shoulder on, let's work, let's deal with it. Not only for private sector, businesses and all these people, but also the members of the society to say, let's have a role also in stabilizing our country.
Okay. That was a great point. Maybe we'll come back to it as we can have a volunteer. There's a few more hands before we wrap things up.
Thank you very much. I would like to circle back, Duma, to you in terms of the unclaimed benefits. The entry to that system, it goes to financial inclusion with this whole thinking about auto-enrollment that's becoming a global policy discussion. We're also working with Treasury. We've got the financial inclusion policy that was published 2 years ago. We're looking at a financial education policy. But is that the route to go? Don't we have structural problems in the country? Can we copy and paste from international conversations? So how would it influence consumers in South Africa if we can't claim what we already got? Thank you.
And there's a lady just in front of you who also had her hand up.
Good morning. Thank you for a very robust discussion that we've had so far. We are going back to unclaimed benefits as well, just to follow up on some of the questions that Rowan has been asking. I have been noticing that there has been some discourse building up within the public in terms of some of the unclaimed benefits. So there are unclaimed benefits that the financial institutions are struggling with, but people and individuals are aware that there are benefits that are due to them that have not been claimed to them, but they don't necessarily know where to go. Like in the event that somebody does pass and that person was regarded as a rather wealthy person, and then suddenly the family is left without any means, and they don't necessarily know where to go to claim these assets that the person who has passed has supposedly had. So it seems like that there's a large gap between where financial institutions are and where the public is, in as far as knowing where to go to claim these assets. Another question is, from an insurance company perspective, I would like to know, how often, when you have had these large assets of unclaimed benefits, how often were these sort of written off if you are unable to locate the person that this was due to? And were there instances where, for example, some of these benefits were needed to be funded by some of the shareholder funds, for example? So just curious about how that process has evolved from an individual company perspective.
Okay, Dumo, I hope you're ready, sir. There's a lot that are coming your way. And funny enough, to the point, so as a journalist, I must say, we do hear you and we do see you as an industry in terms of trying to get the message out to the public that there are these funds on radio, on the newspapers and television. We do see and we hear you, but the question does intimate that perhaps more can be done in that regard in raising public awareness. So maybe you want to comment on that, and also she mentioned, what happens? Do you write off? How does that work? And then thirdly, the lady behind was talking about auto-enrollments potentially being a factor in reducing unclaimed benefits in future, but then what do you do with the existing pot right now?
Yes. Yeah, so look, the unclaimed benefits is a focus for ourselves and as an organization, and also the broader industry. And I do agree there's a lot more awareness that needs to be created around the channels through which people can actually, check for, unclaimed benefits eligibility. So the FSCA does have a website where you can, capture the ID number, and then that starts to give you, the insights and the information in terms of where potentially, funds could be residing that need to be claimed. We need to create a lot more awareness around that. It's also about the completeness and accuracy and just the regular refreshing of the data that, as industries, we are providing to an entity like, the FSCA, just to ensure that that information is actually, accurate. Then also, I think I've also seen some good innovation, for some tracing agents who are starting to use modern, technology as well, in terms of being able to track and trace, even in the most trickiest instances where, maybe you might have sat with an unclaimed benefit for more than 10 years, but you're able to locate the beneficiaries ultimately. So the use of technology, I think, has been another tailwind in this space. So I think from a write-off perspective, we don't write off. I think our focus is really around ensuring that when the individual comes for their money, or when we identify the individuals who the money is due to, we're in a position to deliver that to them, and to deliver that intact to them. Then, look, auto-enrollment, there have been a number of dreams that have been there for the retirement industry in South Africa. The first one was around, some element of compulsory preservation, and the two-pot system, took some material steps in that direction. The next one is around broadening and deepening participation in the retirement funds ecosystem. But to the point made, it would be dangerous to do a copy and paste of, let's say, what has been done in the UK or Australia, because the South African employment structure is very different from the UK and Australia. In those countries, more of the employed population sits in the formal sector. So, registered, monthly salary, fixed, and you've got the information around the underlying individuals who need to contribute. The companies can afford to contribute as well. Whereas in South Africa, you sit with a situation where you have an employed population of about 17 million, and the bulk of that population is actually not covered. So even within the formal employment ecosystem, you sit with a coverage of retirement benefits, which is at around 60%. So there's still 40% in the current ecosystem where there's no coverage. Then you also then sit with a big chunk of the population that is in the informal sector or gig workers, where you're not in an environment where there's fixed regular income. And also there are disparities in the level of data then that's available, the mechanisms to administer those contributions. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done to truly understand how we make something like auto enrollment effective and relevant in the South Africa context. I do believe also as the industry there's a critical role to be played there. So the digitization of solutions, whether it's around onboarding or ongoing servicing, to lower the cost to serve, but then also for us to be innovative in terms of how we can enable members and employers to start contributing at lower levels, because I think there's also that dynamic of, hey, don't touch my take-home pay. So you might want to include more people in the net, but who's going to pay for it? So if you have a gradual approach to how we do that, I think we can also see some successes there. There is always that risk as well, that you broaden the net, but you still then sit with a challenge at the end where you sit with unclaimed benefits and maybe you make the problem worse. But that's where I think some of the reforms from a policy perspective are preparing us. If the policyholder protection rules, the work that has been done around two-pot, etc., as I've mentioned earlier, all of those are the building blocks that ensure that we reduce the risk of that happening when you do broaden the net. Okay. But I fundamentally believe we need to get more and more people in this country, to be able to benefit from the retirement funds ecosystem.
Okay. Thank you for that, and I hope the questions were answered fully. In the event that they weren't, we'll still have a bit of time to network after the breakfast, and you can converse further. Sanisha, I want to give you the last word to respond to the gentleman's comments, and I think it was a really important one, to say that this balancing of the books, great for investors, perhaps even great for business, but potentially having taken away money that was being plowed into the real economy to deal with some real issues that we have by way of crime, by way of the unemployment that we have, particularly amongst the youth. What do you think about that? Should we be worried, and is there anything that can be done differently?
So I think, for the first time we have a bit more accurate monitoring on the criminal and justice system. So Business Leadership South Africa, together with Crutham, now look at structural reform measures, which, in part, as Roy's pointed out, are showing quite a bit of progress and development. And the area on that scope that is struggling, so even some of the governance measures are improving. So, think about the leadership we now have at the South African Revenue Services relative to a few years ago, Treasury, and a number of aspects in the security cluster that have been reformed over time. There are gaps. And so the biggest stumbling block is still on criminal and justice system. I think this is one of the reasons that we can't get an even bigger cut to the wage bill, because I think it was 2 or 3 budgets ago where they looked at, for example, the number of police people per 100,000 population and how that has declined since the global financial crisis, to the extent that we do have these holes where private citizens are now taking it upon themselves. And this is not just unique to the criminal justice system. I mean, you know, we're seeing private sector players filling potholes. We're seeing private sector players going into the space of education, even now in the university space, where there have been so many applicants for universities and not enough positions available to take on these potential students. We're seeing it even in the health space. So I think this is, you know, it's quite telling of the public sector failures in South Africa that private sector are trying to address. I do think in this budget, and the DG did mention it, the money that is going to upping the police force, some more money is going into the criminal justice system security cluster in general. So there have been allocations made there. I think where they're trying to cut expenditure is on more of your inefficient and wasteful expenditure. So the goods and services budget, which is where all the catering and fleet costs, and you know, if you now have 20 cell phone providers instead of one that can give you a better price, they're trying to cut all of that out. You know, I think that the last thing that they'll want to come to is on the education system, the health sector, and the police system. Last year in budget 1.0, when they wanted to have a bigger wage bill, it was actually to have more police, more health sector workers, and more educators in the system. And then, of course, we saw the 2 iterations that followed that actually rolled that back, because what it looked like at the outset was that the wage bill was expanding, but it was in sectors where we actually needed to buffer up. So I think we now have a check from that tracker on the criminal justice system. The DG pointed out there is some funds going in that direction. But again, it's symptomatic of the public sector failures where private sector is now trying to position themselves.
Okay. You're nodding, so it seems as though you're pleased with the response. Thank you so much. But we're going to park it here right now. And I think that the conversation here has essentially just shown us, I mean, there are choices in life. There are always choices to be made. And the choices that are made through this budget can either compound some of the risk factors that have been reflected upon in this discussion going forward, or they could compound some of the growth opportunities that have also been reflected in this discussion. And the difference between the two will be in execution. My hope is that we'll execute for the latter, because certainly I don't want to go back to where we are coming from as an economy. But many thanks to you, and can I ask the audience members to just help me thank the panelists for their insights and engaging thoughts today. And as I said, anyone who didn't have the opportunity to ask questions, there will be a bit of time to network right after the formal proceedings, and I hope that you do take the opportunity to do it as well. But as we make our way back to join our audience members, can I also ask at this stage for the last speaker for this morning to help wrap us up completely, reflecting also more poignantly on household financial capability and what this does mean for the long-term fiscal sustainability of this country. I love that walk that you just did. I mean, presence felt, sir. The CEO of Consult by Momentum, Mr. Johan Mini. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. Cape Town is always a little bit slow, if I may say. Slaap start. I got the sense that this discussion was very, very riveting, if I can call it that. And sometimes we often forget what happened a year ago. Where we thought we had a budget speech and then it didn't happen. It is so different 12 months later, and it shows what can happen in 12 months. And so as we conclude this morning's discussion, I really want to thank each and every one of you for the quality of engagements and the seriousness in which today's conversation was approached. In a post-budget environment where trade-offs are explicit and resources are constrained, it is both necessary and responsible to step back and consider the long-term drivers of fiscal sustainability. The budget sets out government's immediate priorities. It's been debated, but it also reminds of us all of the sustainability of the fiscus, which is shaped well beyond just a single financial or fiscal year. Why do I say that? It's really shaped in households, in labour markets, within corporate South Africa, and more specifically in the way that risk is managed across the economy. The research that we have reflected on today makes an important contribution in this regard. It highlights that household vulnerability is not simply and only a social one. It is a systemic one, with clear implications for public spending, public services, and the stability of the revenue base over time. From the perspective of Momentum and its group of companies, this framing is very important and it matters deeply. Our purpose is rooted in helping normal South Africans build financial security and resilience over the long term. So the fact of the matter is, when households are financially resilient, the broader economic system functions more effectively. But when they're not, when they're under pressure, pressure starts to accumulate elsewhere, often with fiscal consequences. So therefore, one of the most valuable insights from our research is the treatment of financial advice or financial planning. It is not positioned as a product or a channel or a short-term intervention. But more importantly, it is an ongoing journey whereby the advisor acts as a guide or a coach to enable decisions that empowers households to apply financial knowledge consistently, considering their context and real-world conditions. That distinction between product and advice is very important. Here's another fact. Most South Africans actually understand what sound financial behavior looks like, but often they don't display that. The reason is simple. When they face, what they face is complexity, volatility, and limited margin for error. In that environment, advice reduces the cognitive burden, or simply put, the worry about money matters. It supports discipline and enables better long-term choices. Over time, you get this right more and more. This builds this financial capability. The fiscal relevance of this capability is indirect, but it is very material. More resilient households are better able to manage shocks without resorting to emergency support. They're more likely to remain economically active and to contribute sustainably to the tax base. They place, therefore, less pressure on public services linked to financial distress. And these effects do not appear neatly in a single budget or a budget line item, but they accumulate right across the system. For the South African government, this reinforces the value of viewing financial capability as a preventative and resilience-building intervention. It aligns with broader policy objectives related to economic participation, inclusion, and the long-term sustainability, without transferring this responsibility away from government or the state. For Momentum and our peers in the industry, this signals clear accountability. Therefore, trust, transparency, and client centricity are not optional. They are essential if financial advice is to deliver its intended outcomes. Perceptions of advice as product-driven undermine both its reach and its effectiveness. So therefore, addressing this is fundamental to the credibility of our industry. As a business operating under regulatory scrutiny, shareholder expectation, and public accountability, we carry a responsibility to demonstrate that the value we create extends beyond financial performance alone, and that it contributes to the resilience of the system in which we operate. I think today's discussions reinforces that long-term fiscal sustainability is not achieved through policy instruments in isolation. It is supported by millions of households and the decisions they make over time. The extent to which those decisions are informed, supported, and become resilient, therefore matters to all of us. As leaders across government, parliament, industry, and the broader economic community, the opportunity before us is to engage in evidence-based collaboration that strengthens these foundations. Not through quick wins, but through sustained, credible partnerships that recognize the long-term nature of this challenge. So in closing, I want to offer one last reflection. A sustainable public balance sheet is supported by a financially resilient and a sound society. Building that resilience requires alignment across policy, industry, and yes, the people of South Africa, households themselves. Financial advice delivered responsibly, but more importantly at scale, has a meaningful role to play in making that a reality. I want to close by thanking each and every one of you for your engagement today and for the leadership you continue to bring to these very important conversations. Thank you.
He did say close, so I think with that said, the post-budget breakfast court is now adjourned, and do feel free to stay and engage in network, and do have yourselves a wonderful Friday and weekend further. Thank you.
We live our lives, they're fleeting. We can try. We're changing, sliding, slanted, designing a better way. Just to fade away, head still cooking, lightning striking my mind, never been this way. Holding on this crooked, sided place that I hide is the only way. Holding on, still changing, timing, churning, deciding on better days. Holding my breath in and changing all the way. We're changing all the way, hey. And changing all the way.
Take a look at my girlfriend, 'cause she's the only